I found the truth about his life during the will reading. The law office smelled of leather and old secrets, the kind of place where family fortunes were divided and long-held lies finally came to light. I sat in the burgundy chair closest to the window, my hands folded in my lap, watching strangers file into the room with the careful politeness of people who weren't sure why they were there. My husband Robert had been dead for exactly 1 week. 7 days since the heart attack that took him while he was supposedly at a business conference in Chicago. 7 days since the hospital called to tell me that Robert Morrison, not Robert Mitchell, the name I'd known him by for 15 years, had been brought in by paramedics and died, despite their efforts to save him. Robert Morrison, even now, sitting in his lawyer's office, I couldn't reconcile that name with the man who'd shared my bed, my life, my dreams of growing old together. Mrs. Mitchell, the lawyer, a silver-haired man named James Thornton, approached my chair with practiced sympathy. "I'm so sorry for your loss. Robert spoke of you often. Robert spoke of me often." To a lawyer I'd never met, using a name that wasn't his real name, in a life I apparently knew nothing about. "Thank you," I managed, my voice sounding strange in the formal quiet of the office. "We're waiting for a few more people to arrive," Thornton said, consulting his watch. "Robert's will is comprehensive. There are several beneficiaries who need to be present." Several beneficiaries. I'd assumed I would be the only one, that this meeting would be a formality, the reading of a simple will that left everything to the surviving spouse. But the room was filling with people I didn't recognize. People who apparently had claims on my husband's estate that I knew nothing about. A woman in her 30s entered, her dark hair pulled back in a severe bun, her black dress expensive and perfectly tailored. She moved with the confidence of someone accustomed to legal proceedings, scanning the room with sharp eyes before taking a seat across from me. Behind her came an elderly couple, the woman leaning heavily on a walker, the man's hand protective on her elbow. They looked around the room with confusion, as if they weren't sure they were in the right place. "Excuse me," the elderly woman said to Thornton, "we're looking for the reading of Robert Morrison's will. We may have the wrong office." "You're in the right place, Mrs. Morrison," Thornton assured her. "Please, have a seat. We'll begin shortly, Mrs. Morrison." I stared at the elderly woman, my mind struggling to process what I'd just heard. Morrison was Robert's real surname, the name the hospital had used, the name on the legal documents Thornton had shown me. But this woman shared that name, spoke it with the familiarity of family. "Are you Robert's mother?" I asked, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. The elderly woman looked at me with kind but puzzled eyes. "I'm sorry, dear, but I think there's been some confusion. I'm Robert's wife." The words hit me like a physical blow. I felt the air leave my lungs, felt the room tilt slightly around me. Robert's wife, this woman, this stranger, was claiming to be married to my husband. "That's impossible," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I'm Robert's wife. I'm Catherine Mitchell. We've been married for 15 years. The elderly woman's face went pale, and her husband stepped closer to her chair, his expression protective and confused. "There must be some mistake," he said. "My wife Helen has been married to Robert Morrison for 43 years. They have 2 children together. 2 children, 43 years. I felt like I was drowning in information that couldn't possibly be true, couldn't possibly reconcile with the life I thought I'd been living. The woman in the expensive dress leaned forward, her voice cutting through my shock. "I'm sorry, but who exactly are you people? I'm Robert Morrison's daughter, and I can assure you that my father was not married to either of you." Daughter. Robert had a daughter. In 15 years of marriage, he'd never mentioned having children. Had told me he'd never been married before, had built our entire relationship on what was apparently a foundation of lies. Thornton cleared his throat, his expression grave. "Perhaps we should begin the reading. I believe it will clarify the situation for everyone." "How can it clarify anything?" I asked, my voice rising with panic. "These people are claiming to be married to my husband, claiming to be his family. That's impossible, I'm afraid." Thornton said gently that Robert's life was more complicated than any of you realized. He moved to his desk and opened a thick folder, withdrawing several documents. Before we begin with the will itself, I need to explain some background information that Robert provided to me over the years. The MP room fell silent, except for the sound of Helen Morrison's labored breathing and the distant hum of traffic outside the windows. Robert Morrison lived what he called multiple lives, Thornton began. For the past 20 years, he maintained separate identities, separate families, separate existences that were completely unknown to each other. The words seemed to echo in the quiet room, impossible and yet undeniably real. In Chicago, he was Robert Morrison, married to Helen, father to David and Sarah Morrison. He worked as an insurance adjuster and lived in a modest home in the suburbs. Helen Morrison made a small sound, something between a sob and a gasp. In Denver, he was Robert Mitchell, married to Catherine, with no children. He worked as a sales consultant and lived in a different suburb, with different neighbors, different friends, a completely different life. I felt like I was listening to someone describe a movie, a fictional story that couldn't possibly be about my real life, my real husband. There were other identities as well, Thornton continued. Robert maintained at least 3 separate lives with 3 separate families. For over 2 decades, the woman who'd claimed to be Robert's daughter spoke up, her voice shaky. "That's impossible. My father traveled for work, yes, but he was always home. He was at my wedding, at my children's births. He couldn't have been living other lives." Robert was very careful about scheduling, Thornton said. He told each family that his work required extensive travel, that he was often away for weeks at a time. He used this cover to rotate between his different lives, spending time with each family while the others believed he was working. I thought about all the business trips Robert had taken over the years, all the conferences and sales meetings that had kept him away from home for days or weeks at a time. I'd never questioned them, had never doubted his explanations, had trusted him completely. "How was this possible?" Helen Morrison asked, her voice weak with shock. "How could someone live like that? How could someone lie to so many people for so long?" "Robert was very organized," Thornton replied. "He kept detailed records, maintained separate bank accounts, had different social security numbers for different identities. He was, in essence, living as 3 different people." "But why?" I asked. "Why would someone do this? Why would someone choose to live such a complicated lie?" Thornton consulted his notes. Robert left a letter explaining his motivations. He said he felt trapped by the expectations of normal life, that he craved variety and excitement but didn't want to hurt the people he loved by leaving them. He thought he could have multiple lives without anyone getting hurt. "Without anyone getting hurt," Helen repeated bitterly. "And how did that work out?" The room fell silent again as we all contemplated the magnitude of Robert's deception. 3 families, 3 wives, 3 completely separate existences built on lies and careful scheduling and an almost sociopathic ability to compartmentalize his emotions. "Shall we proceed with the will?" Thornton asked. "I think you'll find that Robert tried to provide for everyone, though his methods were ... unconventional." I nodded, not trusting my voice. "Around me. The other beneficiaries, these strangers who were apparently my husband's other families, settled back in their chairs with the same mixture of dread and curiosity that I felt. Whatever Robert's will revealed, I knew it would only be the beginning of understanding the true scope of his deception. The man I'd loved, the man I'd trusted, the man I'd planned to grow old with, had been living a lie so elaborate and so complete that I was only now beginning to grasp its dimensions. The truth about his life was about to unfold in legal documents and careful provisions, and I wasn't sure I was strong enough to hear it. Thornton opened the will with the mechanical precision of someone who had delivered shocking news many times before. But even he seemed uncomfortable with what he was about to reveal, adjusting his glasses twice before beginning to read. "I, Robert James Morrison, also known as Robert James Mitchell and Robert James Matthews, being of sound mind and body, do hereby make this my last will and testament." 3 names. Robert had lived under 3 different names, which meant there was a 3rd family somewhere. A third wife who might be sitting in another lawyer's office right now, learning the same devastating truth we were discovering. Before I detail the distribution of my assets, Thornton read, I want to acknowledge the pain that this revelation will cause to the women I loved and the children I fathered. I know that my choices were selfish and cruel, but I want each of my families to understand that my feelings for them were real, even if the circumstances under which I expressed those feelings were false. Helen Morrison was crying now, quiet tears that spoke of a grief too deep for dramatic sobs. Her husband held her hand, his own face a mask of confusion and growing anger. My feelings were real, Helen whispered. 43 years of marriage, and he says his feelings were real. As if that makes any of this acceptable. The woman who claimed to be Robert's daughter, Sarah. I remembered Thornton calling her, spoke up. How many of us are there? How many families did he deceive? Thornton consulted the will. 3 primary families. Helen Morrison in Chicago, Catherine Mitchell in Denver, and Linda Matthews in Phoenix. There are also several children from these relationships. Several children. I felt another wave of nausea wash over me. Robert had children with other women, children he'd never mentioned to me, children who existed in the lives he lived when he wasn't being my husband. The estate is substantial, Thornton continued. Robert was very successful in his various business ventures, and he was careful to maintain separate financial portfolios for each of his identities. He pulled out a financial summary that made my breath catch. Robert's combined assets totaled nearly $4 million, money I'd never known existed, wealth accumulated through businesses and investments I'd never heard of. In Chicago, Robert Morrison owned a successful insurance agency. In Denver, Robert Mitchell had a consulting firm. In Phoenix, Robert Matthews ran a small manufacturing company. Each business was profitable, and each contributed to the overall estate. I thought about our modest lifestyle in Denver. The careful budgeting we'd done, the times Robert had said we couldn't afford vacations or home improvements. All the while, he'd been wealthy, maintaining multiple businesses and multiple lives with the money he'd kept hidden from all of us. The will divides the estate into 3 equal portions, Thornton read, 1/3 to each of his 3 wives, with additional provisions for his children. Children, Sarah said, her voice tight with emotion. How many children are there? 5 total. David and Sarah Morrison from the Chicago family, no children from the Denver family, and 3 children from the Phoenix family, Robert Jr., Michael, and Jennifer Matthews. 5 children. Robert had been a father to 5 children while telling me for 15 years that he didn't want kids, that he was happy with just the 2 of us, that children would complicate our perfect life together. Helen Morrison looked up from her tears. David and Sarah don't know about this yet. How am I supposed to tell my children that their father was a bigamist, that their entire childhood was built on lies? Robert left individual letters for each of his children, Thornton said. He hoped to explain his actions, to help them understand why he made the choices he did. Understand. Sarah's voice was sharp with anger. How could anyone understand this? How could anyone justify lying to multiple families for decades? Thornton set down the will and picked up another document. Robert also left a detailed explanation of how he managed his multiple lives. He thought it might help everyone understand the scope of his deception. He began to read from what was apparently Robert's confession, his attempt to explain the unexplainable. I began living multiple lives 25 years ago, when I realized that I was not suited for the conventional expectations of marriage and family. I loved Helen, but I felt trapped by the routine of suburban life, by the predictability of coming home to the same house. The same conversations, the same existence every day. When my work required me to travel, I discovered that I could be someone different in each city I visited. I could be the man I wanted to be, free from the weight of history and expectation. It started innocently, using a different name at hotels, inventing stories about my background, pretending to be single when I met interesting women. But then I met Catherine in Denver, and I fell in love with her. Not instead of loving Helen, but in addition to loving Helen. I realized that I was capable of loving multiple people completely, of being a different version of myself with each of them. I told myself that what they didn't know wouldn't hurt them. I convinced myself that I was giving each woman the best version of myself, that they were all getting more love and attention than they would have if I'd been faithful to just one of them. I felt sick listening to Robert's justification for his betrayal. He'd convinced himself that his deception was somehow generous, that he was giving us more by lying to us rather than less. The logistics were complicated, but manageable. Thornton continued reading. I maintained separate bank accounts, separate credit histories, separate social circles. I told each family that my work required extensive travel, which gave me the freedom to move between my different lives. I was careful never to schedule overlapping events. I kept detailed calendars to ensure that I never missed important occasions in any of my families. I was present for births, graduations, anniversaries, holidays. I made sure that each family felt loved and prioritized. The hardest part was maintaining the emotional boundaries. I had to be completely present with each family when I was with them, had to suppress any thoughts or feelings about my other lives. I became very good at compartmentalizing, at being fully Robert Morrison when I was in Chicago, fully Robert Mitchell when I was in Denver, fully Robert Matthews when I was in Phoenix. Helen Morrison stood up abruptly, her walker clattering against her chair. I can't listen to any more of this. 43 years of marriage, and he talks about it like it was a performance. Like I was just one of his roles. Her husband helped steady her, his face dark with anger. How could we not have known? How could we have lived with someone for 43 years and not realized he was living other lives? Because he was very good at it, Thornton said quietly. Robert was intelligent, organized, and completely committed to maintaining his deceptions. He studied each of you, learned your patterns, your expectations, your needs. He became exactly the husband each of you wanted him to be. Sarah spoke up, her voice hollow. That's the worst part, isn't it? He wasn't just lying about who he was performing who we needed him to be. Everything we loved about him was calculated, designed to keep us from questioning his absences. I thought about my marriage to Robert, about the man I'd fallen in love with and lived with for 15 years. Had any of it been real? Had his love for me been genuine? Or had I just been another role he'd played, another performance he'd perfected? There's more, Thornton said, consulting the document. Robert explains how he planned to continue this arrangement indefinitely, how he'd prepared for various contingencies, including what would happen if one of his identities was discovered. He planned to keep lying forever, I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He believed he could maintain his multiple lives until his death, that he could die as each of his identities separately, leaving each family to grieve without ever learning about the others. The audacity of it was breathtaking. Robert had planned to fake his death twice, to let two of his families believe he was dead, while continuing to live with the third. He'd been prepared to put us through the agony of loss just to maintain his elaborate deception. But his heart attack disrupted those plans, Thornton continued. He was in Chicago when it happened, living as Robert Morrison. The hospital contacted Helen as his emergency contact, and his death certificate was issued under his real name. His other identities couldn't be maintained posthumously, so we only learned the truth because he died in the wrong place, Sarah said bitterly. If he'd died in Denver or Phoenix, the rest of us might never have known about each other. The room fell silent as we contemplated the magnitude of Robert's deception and the accident of timing that had finally exposed it. We were three families bound together by our shared betrayal, three sets of people who had loved the same man without ever knowing he existed. And we were only beginning to understand the full scope of what he'd hidden from us. Thornton reached into his desk and withdrew 3 sealed envelopes, each marked with careful handwriting I recognized as Robert's. My heart clenched at the sight of his familiar script, the same handwriting that had left me love notes on the kitchen counter, that had signed birthday cards and anniversary gifts for 15 years. Robert left individual letters for each of his wives, Thornton said, distributing the envelopes. He asked that you read them before we continue with the specific provisions of the will. I stared at the envelope with my name written across it. Catherine Mitchell. Even in death, Robert was maintaining the fiction of my identity, the lie that had defined our entire relationship. Around me, Helen Morrison and Sarah Morrison were holding their own letters, their faces reflecting the same mixture of dread and desperate curiosity that I felt. We were about to hear from our husband, our father, our betrayer, perhaps for the last time. Should we read them aloud? Helen asked, her voice uncertain. That's up to you, Thornton replied. Robert didn't specify whether they should be private or shared. I looked at the other women. These strangers who had shared my husband's love and attention without any of us knowing it. I think, I said slowly, that we've all been living in isolation long enough. Maybe it's time for honesty. Sarah nodded. I agree. We're all in this together now, whether we like it or not. Helen's husband helped her settle back into her chair, and she opened her letter with trembling fingers. I'll go first, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. She unfolded the pages and began to read. My dearest Helen, if you're reading this, then my worst fear has come to pass. You've learned about my other lives, and you're discovering that the man you married was not who you thought he was. I know that nothing I say can justify what I've done to you, to our children, to the family we built together. I know that 43 years of marriage have been retroactively poisoned by my deception, that every memory you have of our life together is now tainted by the knowledge that I was lying to you. But I need you to know that my love for you was real. You were my first wife, my first love, the woman who taught me what it meant to be a husband and a father. Everything good about the man I became started with you. When I began living other lives, it wasn't because I loved you less or because our marriage was lacking. It was because I was selfish and cowardly, because I wanted more than one life could give me, but didn't have the courage to choose just one path. I told myself I was protecting you by keeping my other family's secret. I convinced myself that what you didn't know couldn't hurt you, that I could give you a perfect marriage as long as you never learned about the complications I'd created elsewhere. I was wrong about everything. Helen, you deserved a husband who was present completely, who didn't divide his attention and affection among multiple families. You deserved honesty, fidelity, the simple dignity of knowing that when I said I loved you, I meant only you. I've left you financially secure. But I know that money can't repair the damage I've done to your trust, your memories, your sense of who you are and who we were together. Please tell David and Sarah that I loved them completely, that being their father was one of the greatest joys of my life, even if I was too selfish to let that be enough. I'm sorry, Helen. I'm sorry for all of it. Helen's voice broke on the final words, and she folded the letter carefully, as if it were something precious rather than a confession of betrayal. The room was silent, except for the sound of her quiet crying. My turn, I said, opening my own letter with hands that shook despite my efforts to remain composed. My beloved Catherine, I know that learning about my other lives has shattered everything you believed about our marriage, about me, about the life we built together in Denver. I know that 15 years of love and trust have been destroyed in a single afternoon, and I know that I am entirely responsible for that destruction. You were my escape, Catherine. When I met you, I was drowning in the routine of my life in Chicago, suffocating under the weight of expectations and responsibilities that felt too heavy to bear. You represented freedom, possibility, the chance to be someone different, someone better. With you, I could be the man I'd always wanted to be, spontaneous, romantic, fully present in each moment. I didn't have to carry the history of previous mistakes or the burden of long-established patterns. I could start fresh, love freely, be the husband I'd never quite managed to be in my first marriage. I know how selfish that sounds. I know that I used you as an escape from problems I should have faced, that I built our relationship on a foundation of lies that was always destined to crumble. But my love for you was real, Catherine. Every moment we shared, every conversation, every quiet evening reading together on the couch, all of it was genuine. You weren't just a role I was playing or a fantasy I was living. You were the woman I fell in love with. the woman who made me believe I could be better than I was. I know you must be wondering if anything about our marriage was true. It was all true, Catherine. My feelings, my commitment to you, my joy in our life together. None of that was fabricated. The only lie was the context, the fact that I was sharing similar love with other women in other cities. I've left you enough money to build a new life, to start over without the burden of financial worry. I hope you'll use it to travel, to pursue the dreams we talked about but never had time for, to find happiness with someone who can love you the way you deserve to be loved, completely, honestly, without reservation. You were the best part of my life in Denver, Catherine. You were the woman who taught me that it's possible to fall in love again, to start over, to be surprised by joy even in middle age. I'm sorry I wasn't brave enough to choose just one life, just one love. I'm sorry I wasn't the man you deserved. All my love, always. Robert. I folded the letter and looked up to find both Helen and Sarah watching me with expressions I couldn't quite read. Sympathy, perhaps. Or recognition, the shared understanding of women who had loved the same man and been betrayed by him in identical ways. Sarah opened her letter last, her hands steady despite the tears that had been gathering in her eyes throughout our readings. This one's addressed to all of Robert's children, she said. Should I read it aloud? Helen nodded. David should hear this too, when I tell him. And the other children, they all deserve to know what their father was thinking. Sarah cleared her throat and began. To my children, David, Sarah, Robert Jr., Michael, and Jennifer, you are reading this because you've learned that your father was not the man you thought he was, that the life you shared with me was only one of several lives I was living simultaneously. I know this revelation will change everything you believed about your childhood, your family, your understanding of who I was as a father. I know that every memory you have of me is now complicated by the knowledge that I was keeping enormous secrets from you and your mothers. I want you to know that being your father was the most important role I ever played, and it was the only role that was completely genuine. My love for each of you was pure, uncomplicated by the deceptions I practiced in other areas of my life. When I held you as babies, when I taught you to ride bikes, when I attended your school plays and graduation ceremonies. When I walked Sarah down the aisle at her wedding, in all of those moments, I was completely present, completely myself. Completely, your father. I know that doesn't excuse what I did to your mothers, what I did to your families. I know that my choices have hurt you in ways I never intended, that you'll carry the burden of my deceptions for the rest of your lives. But I need you to know that you were not mistakes or complications or burdens. You were the best parts of my life, the achievements I was most proud of, the legacy I most wanted to leave behind. You have siblings you've never met, half-brothers and half-sisters who share your blood and your loss. I hope that someday you might find comfort in each other, that you might build relationships that transcend the circumstances of your discovery. I failed you as a father by lying to your mothers, by creating a situation where your families could never be whole, never be honest, never be what they deserved to be. But I loved you completely, and that love was the one true thing in a life built on lies. I'm sorry for the pain my choices will cause you. I'm sorry for the confusion and anger and grief you'll carry because of my selfishness. You deserved a better father. You deserved honesty, integrity, the simple security of knowing that your family was real and whole and true. I hope you can forgive me someday. I hope you can find ways to honor the good memories while acknowledging the terrible truth that surrounds them. You are all remarkable people, and you will build better lives than I did because you have the courage to live honestly, to love completely, to choose truth over convenience. I love you all, forever and always. Dad, the silence that followed Sarah's reading was profound, heavy with the weight of Robert's words and the magnitude of his betrayal. We sat in that quiet space, three families bound together by shared loss and shared deception, trying to process the enormity of what we'd learned. He loved us, Helen said finally, her voice wondering. In his letters, in his way, he really did love all of us. But was it enough? I asked. Is love enough when it's built on lies, when it's divided among multiple people who don't know about each other? Sarah wiped her eyes with a tissue. I don't know. I don't know if anything can be enough after this. Thornton cleared his throat gently. There are still the specific provisions of the will to discuss, and some practical matters that need to be addressed. Are you ready to continue? We nodded, though none of us looked ready for anything. We were three families in various stages of grief and shock, trying to understand how to move forward from a revelation that had changed everything we thought we knew about our lives. But we were also bound together now, connected by our shared experience of loving and losing the same complicated, selfish, deeply flawed man. Whatever came next, we would face it together. Thornton pulled out a detailed financial statement. The numbers arranged in neat columns that somehow made Robert's deception feel even more calculated, more deliberate. This wasn't a crime of passion or a moment of weakness. This was a carefully orchestrated fraud that had required decades of planning and meticulous record-keeping. The total estate value is $3.8 million, Thornton began, divided among various assets, properties, and business interests. Robert was very specific about how he wanted everything distributed. He handed each of us a copy of the financial breakdown. I stared at the numbers, trying to reconcile them with the modest lifestyle Robert and I had maintained in Denver. We'd lived in a small ranch house, driven used cars, shopped at discount stores. All the while, he'd been accumulating wealth I never knew existed. The Chicago assets, Thornton continued, include the family home, which is worth approximately $400,000, and Robert's insurance, valued at $800,000. There are also various investment accounts totaling another $300,000. Helen Morrison looked up from her copy of the statement. The insurance agency. Robert always said it was struggling, that we couldn't afford to expand or hire more employees. But these numbers, ... double quotes, the agency was very profitable, Thornton confirmed. Robert maintained separate business accounts that he never disclosed to you. He was essentially running two sets of books. One that showed modest profits, which he shared with you, and another that showed the true financial picture. I felt sick thinking about all the times Robert had told me we couldn't afford things I'd wanted. A vacation to Europe, renovations to our kitchen, the art classes I dreamed of taking. He'd made me feel guilty for wanting more, had convinced me that we needed to be careful with money, all while hiding millions of dollars from me. The Denver assets, Thornton read, include the house at $350,000, the consultant business, $600,000, and investment accounts totaling $250,000. Consulting business, I asked. Robert worked for a sales company. He never mentioned owning his own business. Robert Mitchell Consulting was incorporated 5 years ago, Thornton explained. It appears that Robert gradually transitioned from being an employee to being a business owner, but he never updated you about the change in his professional status. Another lie, another deception. Robert had been a successful entrepreneur while letting me believe he was just a traveling salesman struggling to make ends meet in a competitive market. The Phoenix assets are similar, Thornton continued. House worth $380,000, manufacturing Burris Twinins and Simpsons, $900,000, investments totaling $320,000. Sarah leaned forward in her chair. Wait, there's a third family. You mentioned Linda Matthews in Phoenix, but she's not here. Mrs. Matthews was contacted, but she declined to attend the reading. She's asked me to handle her portion of the estate through separate meetings. Thornton's expression was carefully neutral. She's having difficulty processing the situation. I could imagine. If I was struggling to understand how my 15-year marriage had been a lie, how much worse must it be for someone who had believed herself to be Robert's only wife, only to discover she was one of 3. How many years was he married to her? Helen asked. 12 years. They have 3 children together. Robert Jr. is 16, Michael is 14, and Jennifer is 11. 11 years old. Robert had an 11-year-old daughter I'd never heard of. A child who was probably sitting in a Phoenix living room right now, trying to understand why her father had died with a different name, why there were other families claiming to have loved him too. The will divides the estate into 3 equal portions, Thornton explained. Each wife receives approximately 1.2 million plus the house and Tristanine and Thai children. Rokasponiatiani ani 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 anyani ani 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 anyani ani 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 anyani ani 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 anyani ani 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 anyani ani ani anyani ani 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 anyani ani 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 anyani ani anyani ani anyani ani ani anyani ani anyani 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 ani anyani ani anyani ani anyani ani anyani ani anyani ani Mao with a pat and mud so on. When you so we suskix with I'm kicks kalai kapisak can't descend with into up into but what look on me. To be held in trust until they reach. What about the therapy these children are going to need, the counseling for the wives? Does Robert's will address any of that? Thornton consulted his notes. It appears that Robert spent considerable time thinking about the consequences of his actions. Thornton agreed. His will includes detailed instructions for how he wanted the revelation to be handled, how he wanted his assets distributed, even suggestions for how the families might support each other through the discovery process. Sarah laughed, but there was no humor in it. He managed our grief the same way he managed everything else, with careful planning and detailed instructions. Even in death, he's trying to control how we react to his betrayal. I thought about the Robert I'd known, the man who had planned our vacations down to the minute, who had kept detailed calendars and backup plans for every aspect of our life together. Of course he would have planned for this contingency. Of course he would have tried to manage the aftermath of his deception with the same meticulous attention he'd brought to maintaining it. There's one more thing, Thornton said, pulling out another document. Robert left instructions for what he called a family meeting, a gathering of all his wives and children, to be held after the initial shock of discovery had passed. He hoped that you might find ways to support each other, to build relationships that could transcend the circumstances of your meeting. A family meeting, Helen said slowly. He wants us to become one big happy family, united in our shared betrayal. He wanted you to have the choice, Thornton corrected. He understood that you might never want to see each other again, but he also thought there might be value in knowing each other, in sharing your experiences of loving the same man. I looked at Helen Morrison, this elderly woman who had loved Robert for 43 years, who had raised his children and built a life with him that was apparently as false as mine had been. I looked at Sarah Morrison, who was discovering that her father had been a stranger, that her entire childhood had been built on lies and careful scheduling. What do you think? I asked them. Do you want to meet the others? Do you want to try to make sense of this together? Helen was quiet for a long moment, her hands folded in her lap, her face reflecting the weight of 43 years of memories that had been suddenly I think, she said finally, that I need to understand who Robert really was. Not the version of him I knew, not the role he played when he was with me, but the whole person. And I think the only way to do that is to talk to the other people who loved him. Sarah nodded. I want to meet my half-siblings. I want to know if they're anything like David and me, if there are family traits that transcend the lies Robert told. I want to know if we're really family, or if that's just another fiction he created. I thought about it, about the possibility of sitting in a room with all of Robert's families, all of his victims, all of the people who had been unknowingly sharing his love and attention for years. I think I need to know how he did it, I said. I need to understand the logistics, the planning, the sheer audacity of maintaining 3 separate lives for decades. I need to know if there were signs I missed. If there were moments when I could have discovered the truth, then it's settled, Thornton said. I'll contact Mrs. Matthews and see if she's willing to participate in a family meeting. Robert suggested that it be held in a neutral location, perhaps a hotel conference room, where no one would feel like they were on someone else's territory. As we prepared to leave the law office, I realized that my life had been divided into 2 distinct chapters, before the will reading and after. Everything I'd believed about my marriage, my husband, my identity as Robert's wife, had been destroyed in the space of 2 hours. But something else was beginning to emerge from the wreckage. A strange sense of connection to these other women who had shared my experience of loving Robert, of being deceived by him, of discovering that the man we'd trusted completely had been living elaborate lies. "Helen," I said, as she prepared to leave with her husband, "I know this is all overwhelming, but I want you to know that I never knew about you. I never would have married Robert if I'd known he was already married." She looked at me with eyes that were kind, despite their sadness. "I believe you, Catherine, and I want you to know that I don't blame you for what Robert did. You were as much a victim of his deception as I was." Sarah approached me as well. "I'm sorry about your marriage. I'm sorry that my father put you through this. But I'm also glad we know the truth now, even if it hurts." As I drove home to the house, Robert and I had shared the house that was apparently worth $350,000 more than I'd ever imagined. I thought about the family meeting we'd agreed to attend. 3 wives, 5 children. All of us bound together by our shared experience of loving a man who had never really existed. Robert had given us one final gift in his death: the truth about who he really was, and the opportunity to build something real from the ruins of his elaborate fiction. Whether we could do that, whether we could find healing and connection in our shared betrayal, remained to be seen. But for the first time since learning about Robert's other lives, I felt something that might have been hope. 6 weeks later, I sat in a hotel conference room in Kansas City, neutral territory, as Robert had suggested, waiting for the most surreal family reunion in history. The room was generic and beige, with corporate artwork and a long table that could seat 12. Today, it would seat 8, 3 wives and 5 children, all of us connected by our shared betrayal by the same man. I'd arrived early, needing time to prepare myself for faces I'd only seen in photographs Thornton had shared. Helen Morrison was the first to arrive, moving slowly with her walker, her husband supporting her elbow. She looked frailer than she had at the will reading, as if the weight of Robert's deception had aged her in the weeks since we'd learned the truth. "Catherine," she said, settling into the chair across from me. "How are you holding up?" "Some days better than others," I admitted. "You, the same. David and Sarah are having a hard time. They keep asking questions I can't answer, about their childhood, about whether any of their memories are real." Sarah Morrison arrived next, followed by a young man who could only be her brother David. He had Robert's eyes and his stubborn chin, and seeing him was like looking at a ghost of the man I'd married. "You must be Catherine," David said, extending his hand. "I'm sorry we're meeting under these circumstances." "I'm sorry too," I replied. "For all of us." The door opened again, and a woman in her 40s entered, with 3 teenagers in tow. This had to be Linda Matthews, the 3rd wife, the one who had been married to Robert for 12 years. She looked tired, her face drawn with the strain of the past 6 weeks. "I'm Linda," she said simply, taking a seat at the far end of the table. "These are my children, Bobby, Michael, and Jennifer." The children looked uncomfortable, uncertain, as if they'd been dragged to this meeting against their better judgment. The youngest, Jennifer, couldn't have been more than 11, and she kept glancing around the room with wide, confused eyes. "Thank you all for coming," I said, though I wasn't sure who should be leading this conversation. "I know this is difficult for everyone. Difficult doesn't begin to cover it," Linda said, her voice sharp with pain. 6 weeks ago, I thought I was a widow. Now I find out I was never really married at all, that my children are bastards, that my entire adult life has been a lie." The word bastards hung in the air, ugly and hurtful. Jennifer flinched as if she'd been slapped, and her older brother Bobby put a protective arm around her shoulders. "They're not bastards," Helen said firmly. "They're Robert's children, all of them. What he did to us doesn't change that, doesn't it?" Linda's voice was bitter. "My marriage certificate is worthless. Robert was already married when he went through a ceremony with me. Legally, my children have no claim to his name, his legacy, anything." Thornton had explained this to us during our individual meetings. Robert's first marriage to Helen was the only legal one. His subsequent ceremonies with Linda and me had been elaborate shams, performed by ministers who didn't know they were participating in bigamy. The will provides for all the children equally, Sarah pointed out. Dad made sure of that. Your dad, Bobby said, speaking for the first time. He was your dad for 34 years. He was our dad for 12, but apparently he was playing favorites the whole time. That's not fair, David replied. None of us knew about the others. We all thought we were his only family. But you were his real family, Jennifer said, her young voice trembling. You were the ones he was actually married to. We were just ... what? A hobby. I felt my heart break for this child, this little girl who was trying to understand why her father had lived a lie, why her family wasn't real in the way she'd always believed. You were all his real family, I said, looking around the table at these 5 young people who shared Robert's features, his mannerisms, his genetic legacy. He didn't love any of you less because he was living multiple lives. He loved you all completely, just ... separately. How do you know? Michael Matthews asked. How can any of us know what was real and what was performance? It was the question that had been haunting all of us, the one that made every memory suspect, every moment of happiness questionable. Because, Helen said slowly, I've been thinking about this for 6 weeks. Going over every conversation, every moment, every year of my marriage. And I realized something. Robert couldn't have faked 43 years of love. He couldn't have performed being a father for 34 years. Some things are too big, too fake, too consistent to be lies. Linda looked skeptical. He faked being faithful. He faked being honest. Why couldn't he fake love? Because love isn't just words, Sarah said. It's actions, consistency, presence. Dad was present for all of us. He showed up for school plays and graduations and birthdays. He held us when we were sick, helped us with homework, taught us to drive. You can't fake that level of commitment over decades. I thought about my own marriage to Robert, about the quiet moments that had defined our relationship. The way he'd brought me coffee in bed every Sunday morning, the way he'd listened to me talk about my work, my dreams, my fears, the way he'd held me during my mother's funeral, his presence steady and comforting in my grief. He compartmentalized, I said. That's what he did. When he was with each of us, he was completely present, completely committed to that life. The problem wasn't that his love was fake, it was that he was trying to love too many people, to be too many different versions of himself. But why? Jennifer asked, her voice small and lost. Why wasn't one family enough? Why weren't we enough? It was the question none of us could answer, the one that cut to the heart of our shared pain. Why hadn't Robert been satisfied with one life, one love, one family? What had driven him to create such an elaborate web of deception? I think, David said carefully, that Dad was afraid of missing out. Afraid of choosing one path and wondering what the others might have held. So he tried to live all of them at once. That's selfish, Bobby said flatly. Yes, Helen agreed. It was incredibly selfish, but it was also human, in a twisted way. How many people wonder what their lives would have been like if they'd made different choices? Dad just decided to find out. At our expense, Linda pointed out. At everyone's expense, I corrected, including his own. Think about the stress he must have lived with, the constant fear of discovery, the exhaustion of maintaining 3 separate identities. He paid a price for his choices too. We sat in silence for several minutes, each of us lost in our own thoughts, our own attempts to make sense of the senseless. What happens now? Jennifer asked finally. Are we supposed to be a family? Are we supposed to pretend this is normal? I don't think anything about this is normal, Sarah said with a sad smile. But maybe we can be something. Maybe we can be people who understand each other in a way no one else ever will. You mean because we all loved the same person? Michael asked. Because we all loved the same person, and we all lost him in the same way, Sarah corrected. Because we all have to figure out how to rebuild our understanding of who we are, who he was, what our relationships with him meant. Linda looked around the table, her expression softening slightly. I have to admit, it helps to know I'm not alone in this. For 6 weeks, I've felt like I was going crazy, like I was the only person in the world dealing with this kind of betrayal. You're not alone, Helen said firmly. None of us are alone anymore. As the afternoon wore on, we shared stories about Robert, the different versions of him we'd known, the ways he'd been consistent across his multiple lives, the small details that revealed his true character beneath the elaborate deceptions. We learned that he'd told the same jokes to all of us, that he'd had the same favorite foods in every household, that he'd sung the same off-key lullabies to all of his children. We discovered that despite living multiple lives, Robert had been fundamentally the same person in each of them, flawed, loving, selfish, and genuine in his own complicated way. By the time we prepared to leave, something had shifted among us. We weren't a traditional family, would never be a normal family, but we were connected by something deeper than blood or law. We were connected by our shared experience of loving and losing the same impossible man. Will we do this again? Jennifer asked as we gathered our things. If you want to, I said. If it helps. It does help, she said. It helps to know that Dad really loved us, even if he loved us wrong. As I drove home from Kansas City, I thought about Robert's final gift to us, not the money he'd left us, but the opportunity to find each other, to build something real from the ruins of his elaborate fiction. He'd given us the truth, painful as it was, and the chance to heal together. It wasn't the family any of us had planned for, but it was the family we had now. And perhaps, in time, it would be enough.